Hello, my name is Jade and today we will be discussing Again by Lockhart. This is actually the first book that I finished during the reading rush, which is happening as I speak, but by the time you're watching this it's probably long gone. So I'm going to link all my videos I did on the reading rush down below. In the first two I'm reading Again, so if you want to see a little bit more of the experience, go watch those. Lockhart also wrote We Were Liars and Genuine Fraud. I have videos discussing both of these, which I'll also link down below. We Were Liars I consider one of my all-time favourite books. It's, however, has been so long that I can't remember details as crisply as I want to. I just remember the emotions it made me feel, and I just remember marveling at how clever it was and how utterly unique. It was unlike anything I'd ever read before. Genuine Fraud I didn't love as intensely as We Were Liars. I think I found it to be a little bit predictable, but I also knew more going into it than I wanted to know. The synopsis on this I think really hinders the book, but I still found it completely unique. The way it's told backwards. Her writing is really solid to me, and I love what she does with the words, the way she does metaphors and symbolism. I think it's just all so cleverly done. Both of these are kind of mystery. This one's more of a thriller, this one's more of a mystery. And then we have Again. This one's not like that. This one's... It's really hard to say what Lockhart books are about without giving too much away. They're really best going in blind. This one, again, I read the quote on the front, because it's on the front, it's hard to avoid, and I read the back, and so I kind of knew, not necessarily what the plot was going to be about, but the kind of themes and the kind of topics we're going to be tackling here. It's described more as a love story, which is right. It deals a lot with themes of love, but in a wholly unique way for so many reasons. I really loved it. I definitely think this rates higher for me than Genuine Fraud did. We Were Liars made me feel so many emotions, and this one made me feel all of the emotions, which is really cleverly done because we don't know everything about this character. It's only a 280 page book, it's very short. The way she gets us to feel things for these characters, there's a somewhat of a cut-off feeling. That's not a bad thing, and I felt so much for these characters anyway. I teared up multiple times throughout it. Really touching and beautiful. I just really loved it. 10 out of 10. I think have I said that yet? I think I'd give it a 10 out of 10. A lot of people aren't gonna love this. There are gonna be some people out there who struggle with it because of certain aspects of the book, but I loved it personally. Oh look, I made my nails match my book somewhat unintentionally. Okay, that's it for the non-spoiler section of this video. I'm going to talk spoilers about Again. Highly recommend it. Goodbye if you have yet to read Again. I don't know if the US covers are like this as well, I've not checked, but they all have the big text with blurred people, and I really like this cover design. And then Genuine Fraud happened and we said goodbye to that. I don't think it's one of my favourite covers in the world. It's somewhat misleading, but I like the fact it's a little bit misleading, I think, because it works for the shock factor. I was anticipating Jack to be endgame. A typical YA contemporary. Girl meets boy and then it's about them falling in love. Maybe they'll fall in and out of love a couple times and there'll be hardships. Ultimately, they'll end up together. We see that all the time, and it's just like, nope. In no universe, in none of these universes did they actually end up together. I don't think, and some of them would like connect over time as well. Like when they were at the philosophy party, they went and sat on a hammock together, and then later on, and he picked her up in the rain, one of the alternate universes referred back to the hammock. She'd wanted to kiss him since they'd been on hammock together, so that was a continuation. So I wonder if all the other ones were continuations or if it was just like a couple of them, but I'm pretty sure in every universe her and Jack never worked out. It dwindled, and then in the end there's only two alternate universes when she was waiting outside his work, and it didn't work out in either of those two universes, I don't think. So it was really interesting, and I loved that aspect of it. I mean, I was kind of sad because I did like Jack, but they just weren't meant to be, and that's okay. Sometimes things don't work out. And then these alternate universes, right, that's I think what they ultimately are. They're ultimate versions of what could have been, but sometimes it felt like things that she was imagining in her head, like when she was watching him paint, all of the different scenarios felt like the kind of thing she'd be running through her head, like ways this could turn out. And sometimes I think it was kind of painted in a light, like her interpretation of things, because she kind of had such a negative view on herself, what she thought would actually end up happening. I'm assuming that was purposeful. I don't think they necessarily have to be what she's thinking. I think they could be. I think it can be interpreted any dang way you want to interpret it, because there are multiple universes. Like, no one gets to make these rules up. And I think that's one of the reasons why I found them so wholly fascinating. And I don't think they'd work for everyone. I think some people would get frustrated, especially with the end. Reading the end, I was kind of sitting there like, oh, do I like this? Am I okay with this? And it did kind of feel not boring, but we'd seen this stuff before. It went by very quickly and I wasn't as invested at first, but I think the way it ended and the point it ended up making, I'm on board with. So I do think the end really works, because ultimately it's about, no matter which universe you're in, no matter what happens, some things are gonna go well and some things are gonna go bad. You're gonna take some opportunities and you're gonna turn down others, and that's okay. It all ends up okay in both of them. I do think she has more character growth in the end section. That end section, she felt much more confident as a person and much more stable as a person. Like the way she turned away to Mikey, she just didn't respond to him, she didn't owe him anything, and the way that she and Oliver fell in love, and it was a much healthier relationship. Like, it wasn't perfect, but relationships aren't perfect. Like, that's such a toxic view. But then of course they still didn't end up together, and for some reason I really liked the fact that she ended up alone in both of them. That felt really important to me, so they had the same message going. They're both saying that things are going to be okay in the end, you can be alone. Especially in the second one, she really comes to terms with that. Less so in the main story. Her character growth doesn't feel as strong, but I think that in itself says something. It's two completely different versions of Adelaide. They're not going to be the same. She's gone through a lot more ups and downs in the version that we read, the main version, and at the end she ultimately opens up to her brother, and I think that's this version's way of letting people in, and I think she's going to start to learn these lessons and cope through it. I think they're there, it's just not as clear. I think she's on her way though. I loved her relationship with Toby. I teared up so many times reading it because of Toby. That was really important to me as well. In the end part, like, it just gave him this big rant. I was kind of like, whoa, and I was worried that they wouldn't mesh together as well in this next part, but I think those two big things, the fact that she and Toby come together and the fact that she ends up alone, they're both really central to the story, and so it's really important they were in both. Oh, reading the version of reality where he died, and then we flip to the version of reality where he never became an addict at all, was such a punch to the gut. It made me feel so many things. The way it flip-flopped like that made it even so more painful. The fact that we could have avoided all this heartache. Obviously it's such a complex issue, and I think she does think about it quite maturely, but you could understand why she feels somewhat betrayed. I don't think she can necessarily help it. Of course, I don't think in any way we should be blaming Toby either, but the way it just kind of explored those issues was so interesting to me. And I want to say I read something that deals somewhat with an addict before, but I honestly can't think of what it would be. What was also right after this section, we found out that she was the one that found him. We didn't find that out for so long, and I think the way it was layered in this really interesting way, the way it would flash back to things, was so unique and interesting, and I loved that about this. I loved the way it was formatted and structured. And so that whole section, finding out that she was the one that found him, and also like seeing her finding him, and then we have those sections, it was so heart-wrenching. And of course before this we'd had all these little setups of flashbacks of when they were kids and when they were friends and the games they'd play. Just the theme of family in general was a lot bigger in here than I anticipated. And friendship, I loved her friendship with Stacey S. It was so great, and it was such like a healthy, I think, friendship. And I think that's somewhat rare. Like, a lot of the time we see girls having spats with one another, being a bit bitchy. It happens IRL. Like, it's understandable why, but I'm glad that it didn't happen here, because we didn't need it, and stayed focused on what it needed to stay focused on. And the whole falling in and out of love and just how confused she was, I think it felt really real to me. And these guys felt so dramatic what was going on, like especially with the whole Mikey situation. What he said sounded kind of cheesy and cliche, and the fact that he sent her an email and didn't show up, and I'm so confused, I think we should see each other. It kind of felt somewhat overdramatic, like they were so young, but it feels important at that age, and it is kind of somewhat cliche and cheesy, and everything is over the top at that age because you're so full of emotions. And so I loved that. I loved it. I loved it so. Okay, I'm gonna go through kind of rundown of particular things that I liked. Would slip into poetry a lot, like the words on the page. It would often be done when she was particularly emotional about something, when she had particularly strong feelings about something. And and the words were often so beautiful, and it sped up the reading of it, and I think it worked really well, especially because she says in the beginning that sometimes she thinks in poetry, so it works, and I really loved that aspect as well. Again, it just made it wholly unique. Symbolism is really important to again the whales, and I love that we finally got an explanation of the whales. The egg yolk of misery, which just came up again and again. It's such like a good strong image though of what it felt like to be Adelaide at that time. When Jack came in, obviously he's on the cover, so I like immediately knew he must be significant, and he ended up being way less significant than you would expect. That was such a great pleasant surprise. I think it works that he's on the cover, and it kind of leads you down the wrong path a little bit. I loved the inclusion of the dogs. They all had such weird names, and I loved it when she'd think about what they would say. These are rotten dogs, she said. You're rotten dogs. Did you know that? They didn't know. They loved themselves. And the description of her falling in love with Jack, it's obviously very insta-lovey, like it's love at first sight trope, was idolizing him. I did definitely detect like you're putting words onto him. You don't know him yet. They were like big claims, and so when he said it later on, when they kind of broke up, it felt so right. She comes to this slow realization that was putting things onto him, and maybe her feelings with Mikey was getting confused with her feelings with Jack. And with that recitation, Adelaide Butchroyd gave Jack Cavallero her heart, impulsively, gloriously, openly. She gave it to him, falling in love with someone she did not know, wondering at the curve of his cheek and the wave of his hair and the way his shirt draped over his shoulders. She wanted to know the story of the scar on his abdomen. How had he gotten that wound? How well had it healed? She could see by looking at him that he had been vulnerable, that he had lived, survived. She wanted to see all his scars and see all of him, and she felt suddenly intensely certain that he was a safe person to show her her own scars too. She thought, maybe we have known each other always, maybe our hearts encountered each other somehow, like 200 years ago at a cotillion? Him in a frock coat and me in whatever, some kind of elegant and complicated dress. Or maybe our encounter was in another possible world, that is, in one of the countless other versions of this universe. There was running parallel to this one. We are already in love. Which is also so ironic because they don't end up together in any of the alternative universes, and it kind of cements the themes really early on. And she brings this up a couple times about how she feels like they've known each other in past lives, and it is very deep, and I'm wondering if it was true or not, or if she just wanted that to be the case. A lot of the time she wanted things to be the case, and they just clearly weren't happening. Like the amount of time she wanted someone to change her mind, and she would like kiss them or just kind of call out to them, but she wouldn't convince them otherwise, really. I just find that section really beautiful to read nonetheless. At the time, like I'm okay with it now, but at the time I longed for it in the way that she longed for it. It's instant attraction, and that will build in your mind. And Adelaide describes it this way, like you'll build things and put things onto them until you get to know them better, because you want to get to know them better. And she did that here. We also never found out about his leg and the wound on his side. That was an interesting choice as well, because again, we didn't deserve that information from him. We didn't know him well enough to get that information. Perla and her in chapter 2 have a conversation about the multiverse, and their conversation on like philosophy, and like the philosophy in the mind sounded really interesting. The theme of her sadness making her unlovable came up a lot. It was really sad to read. You can understand how that would seem ugly, and you have to kind of be careful when telling people these things. But the way she would word it a lot of the time was really beautifully written, and it made me really sympathise for Adelaide. Again, it makes it kind of ironic, the reason that Jack ultimately split things off with her, because her sadness on top of his was too much for him to handle, and it kind of reinforced what she was thinking. But like, people don't know what's going on inside of other people's heads, so again that felt really real to me. And the way that he kind of encouraged her and kept kissing her and stuff, even though he never really wanted a girlfriend, and he knew logically he would have to cut this off sooner or later, like he wasn't perfect. It was all very real feeling. Chapter 4 is just completely dedicated to Adelaide's brother, and I really loved getting to know him more. And I loved the memories of when they were kids, and I loved how they kind of came back into play, like the vegetable war they had, and the green M&Ms by the fountain was really nice, and the timing of it I think was really cleverly done. She felt nostalgic for the very summer she was living, for those evenings at Joelle's, for the aching way the boy made her feel when he kissed her, even though he was a little vacant and he didn't make her laugh. She had never before thought of her own life with nostalgia as she lived it, but that summer it was overwhelming. This will never happen again, she thought. It will never be like this again. Hold on to this feeling, remember it. And yet she also experienced waves of dissociation from it all. It wouldn't last, so why did it matter? Come fall, she should have different friends. Who cared what happened with any of it? I related to that so strongly, because I felt this exact thing multiple summers now. So well worded. It was so nice to see it on the page. I loved their swimming trip when she went with Jack and his friends. That was a lot of fun. And then she gets that call from Mikey, and I was very worried that he was using her, because he would only kind of reach out to her when it interested him, and he'd always like ask how she was doing and stuff. I don't think he was necessarily being a bad person, but I was definitely very very concerned. I think it was very well foreshadowed that things weren't going to work out with them. The way she described the breakup felt really real and honest. This book just felt so real and honest to me. When Toby comes home, I think it's before he relapsed, and she's trying to tell him about why she loves set design so much, and she kind of goes on and on about it because it's so important to her. It seemed somewhat random, her take in set design, and hearing her justification of this, it all made so much sense all of a sudden. In the theatre, Adelaide went on, wanting him to understand why she found this so interesting. Your audience doesn't expect things to look real. Like, you can't have a real car on the stage anyway, can you? So instead you make something obviously artificial, you just create the feeling, and maybe the thing you make instead of looking real feels true. Maybe truer than real. Does that make sense? This kind of theme came up a lot in the book. I really liked that. Like all of the weird art and the way it reflected different things. I loved the one that was completely in gold and mirrors, and the way it kind of reflected being in your own mind. All of the art pieces I think were done really well. And it was so nice that she just kept going on about it to him because she wanted him to understand. She wanted her brother back. And I loved their conversation about the facial hair. And then we go from there straight into when he relapsed. And again, it was such a punch in the gut. Levi did feel kind of absent in the present time. He had a summer admin job and I forgot about that, so that makes sense now why he did. But he came up in one of their art trips and was like, where was he this whole time? When she was like jackless for a while, why didn't you text him? Why is he always texting you? And I don't know if there was more texts between them that we just didn't see, because she said to Stacey that she texted him a lot and he just never responded. So do we think that meant in her mind that she imagined all the texts that she could send and she ultimately just never sent them? And I think that might be one of the lessons that she's learned from this experience, that she can't wait for things to come to her. She needs to seize them herself. And then of course she makes her own set, kind of loosely based off this art exhibit she saw with the gold, and she put the bed on the wall. Hearing her reasoning behind it all was really interesting. And I loved when she showed her teacher, who was very inappropriate and weird. So many of the time she wanted to fight for things and she longed for things to be different, but she didn't actually fight for them. And here she fought, not particularly well. I think in the alternate reality she does it even better, but I was really proud of her for starting to fight back. And there was an alternate reality where she like crashed it all. It just so well represented how she was feeling at the time. Like, and when she was sitting in the dog pee, again, it represented what she was feeling at the time. Symbolism was so important here. When he started texting her and he started reaching out, so happy, and I loved it so much. And their memories, and how he's talking about the good memories are inside them. They're inside both of them. They have this connection. And also I think she kind of needed to hear that. She needed a friend at that point, and this was the becoming of her having this new friend in a way. What I mean is the Halloween candy stories inside us both, and the zucchini and the terrible minty. And the way he texted was really interesting. I loved the way he would use like capital letters. He felt like such a strong character. I think he was really well done. She like keeps talking about these strong feelings for him, and I was like, it seems like you haven't really talked very much, and you're talking about this connection. You don't seem to know each other very well. Like, have I missed something? And no, I hadn't. It was her making things seem more important than they actually were, and it felt very unreliable. Hearing the way as well Toby would describe the addict inside of him and comparing himself as a werewolf, and how he didn't think he was that person anymore. It was just so touching. You feel so many emotions. I teared up so many times at the Toby sections. I just loved how involved he was. I didn't expect him to be so involved. When she was sitting in the dog pee, and obviously she picked up the phone, and in the end reality she kind of ignored it. The healthy thing to do, she needed to move on. And in one of the realities she takes back, there is no us anymore. I was like, this is so strongly what she should do, but I know she's not going to, because she's just so desperate for love and to feel understood and wanted. And I think the fact that it's really important that she ends up alone and that she reunites with Toby is so important, both because she finds that love in Toby in a different way. She's understood by Toby. He will listen to her and hear her out in a way that none of these other people will do yet, because she's expecting too much of them, and I think she needs it in a more friendly manner. Of course she has Stacey S, but I don't think Stacey S quite understands. You know, they have very different mindsets. Toby will understand her in a way that no one else will. So well done. Take a shot every time I say it. Let's see how drunk I can get people. And when she does answer the phone, she's like, I shouldn't hinge my emotions to people in this way. I know this isn't healthy, but you know, I can't help it. Here we go. And it was so real, because sometimes you can't help it and you know it's not healthy, and it looks at all the goods and the bads and all of the different perspectives of falling in love so well. Snoop's from one of her teacher's houses at one point. Again, she's idolizing them. They're probably perfect. Adults like him probably knew how to love other people so that other people liked them. They didn't talk too much. They weren't too too angry or too sad. They were loved back by their lovers, by their siblings. Didn't get over attached to dogs who didn't even belong to them, which is probably wrong. There's no rules, it's not something you can understand. And this was again very big theme, her trying to understand love, and ultimately I think she doesn't understand love, but that's because she can't. It doesn't work that way. It's not just one straightforward thing that you can understand love. Adelaide's texts, particularly with Toby, I don't remember if she did this with any of the other text conversations. It'd be interesting to go back and look someday. But sometimes they'd be middle and sometimes they'd be on the right. I wonder if that means anything, because it feels like it should, but I didn't see a correlation, but I didn't notice it until a while, and I was like, this probably actually means something. I wonder if the more significant texts were on one side, or maybe it's just showing how she's kind of all over the place with her emotions. And then I loved it when she calls Toby and everything just bubbles out. I think this is one section that's formatted differently. See? She almost changed how I feel about the thing that I made, and that just feels wrong, you know? Shouldn't I decide how I feel about the thing I made? And it kind of relates back to her feelings of people and how she puts things onto them, and how the way Jack was trying to change her mind, she did feel cheated, and it did feel like that in some way, because some of what she's saying was true. Like, one of the alternatives, when they kind of broke it off, they kind of had more of a fight. She argued back a lot, and lots of the things she was saying did seem true. Of course, the things he was saying was true as well. Like, she was idolizing for sure. And like when Mikey told her that she didn't love him, and she was like, why do you get to tell me how I feel? And there it felt so real. Again, I've experienced this before, where someone kind of convinces you out of an emotion or a feeling, and then you kind of look back afterwards and like, hang on, what just happened? And how is this okay? Because it's not, and it was so... I love that idea. There's so many ideas in E. Lockhart's books that I just understand and agree with completely. They feel so personal. So again, that's one of the reasons why I understand that E. Lockhart's books, they're probably not for everyone, but they get me. Adelaide took a shaky breath. I'm not okay. I'm not okay right now, but I'm not high. Okay. Do you want to start from the beginning? Toby asked. I have half an hour before I have to go back to work. So she did. Tears! Up until that point, he'd been just kind of venting onto her and kind of releasing his emotions to her, and she was kind of taking it and trying to give him advice where she could, but she still didn't fully trust him yet, I think. And so this was the point where she broke, and then she told him everything. It's a sign that she trusts him again now, and I loved that kind of this version ended with that. It felt so right. It almost felt like the right end to the book, and then that's, I think, when we went into the end section where I was kind of like, what's going on here? I don't know how to feel about this. And that end section, there'd be like little flashes of realities that have happened before, like how her art she would make was like weird abstract art that was very reminiscent of Jack's art, like his whale car thing. And Mikey, his reaction to Toby was, oh, but it's good that he's recovering. And in one of the realities early in the book, that's kind of what I think she kind of imagined him saying. Felt very true to his character. That's what he said now. And I think there were a couple other little flashes that I really enjoyed. When she described Oscar's music the first time, the way it felt like he was taking all of her emotions and just like flooding it out of the ceiling. A, it was very pretty to read. B, again, that felt very real. And C, it felt like something, I thought that maybe something would start between them, or at least they'd have like a bond, like a friendship. So it felt very natural for it to come in this end section. And when they broke up and they were running through that scenario with each other, I teared up then, and I wasn't expecting to, because this is a relationship we'd seen for so little, and yet I cared so much. It's so clever the way she makes things affect you in such a short amount of time. It felt very La La Land-esque as well. And I think the way that La La Land kind of ended in that, I don't want to say anti-climax, but it feels like it, but ultimately they have everything they wanted. But I think those things, they resonate here as well, the kind of anti-climax of it and how ultimately it's for the best. And I wonder if they will ever see each other again. I loved her mother, and I loved how we'd get flashes of the parents. They weren't there all the time though, because Adelaide wanted independence, and at that age you kind of just want your own life, and you kind of try and create your own life, and you have your own life. I loved it when they were going around the shop and she had the basket full of things. Adelaide's like, people are going to think I'm a hoarder, and her mother's like, yeah, but you love that about me. And when they were whispering, her and Toby on their side of the table, about how Toby was saying, yeah, but you just need to let her do these things, like she just wants to feel loved and needed, and kind of mirrored all the feelings that Adelaide wanted throughout the book. And I loved the end chunk of words. Again, I teared up because it was just so beautiful, and it was just such a nice ending. And I kind of think it might even be the unthing said at the end of the other you know, the other reality, the main reality that I read for most of the book, I think it could apply there. Because we're not at the end of the summer, right? We don't end the summer in that other reality. We kind of leave towards the end, but not actually at the end. So she very much could get to this point, I think. We're very much headed in that direction with her relationship with Toby. And I could see him visiting with Rebecca and then helping her move in rather than her moving in with a friend or with a romantic interest. I loved it when she was looking down and kind of observing people, and the fact that that's how we lead into this section. Adelaide was glad to be at Alabaster. She would take sculpture and puppetry classes. There she would build shapes that were not what they seemed to be, images of boys who were not what they seemed to be or who they used to be, images of battles that were reunions, and whales and wool hats and tampons that stood for love. She would build spaces that existed only in her imagination, contradictory rooms, and things she could not express with words, because they could not cohere into a single orderly story. These things would become tangible onto her fingers, and in making them Adelaide would heal her bleeding wounds and release her fury. She'd open her lungs so that she could breathe deeply in the wet air of New England fall, and she'd open her heart to people and dogs. She'd love herself even with her sadness and her distractibility, her defences and her failures. The process of making would stretch open the universe until it was frighteningly and gloriously wide with possibility. It was such a powerful set of words, and I couldn't help but be overwhelmed by emotion. She's finally coming to love herself, which is a really big theme. She's so trying to get like romantic love, and the fact that she ends up finding love in Toby, and ultimately she's going to end up finding love in herself. I love that they took Rabbit as well, and when Rabbit bit her and she was saying the things against the wall, I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't have, I really felt for her, and all the things Rabbit kind of said, the fact that she thought she was loved, she thought she was wanted. Again, it was so reminiscent of what Adelaide had felt. The weird grandiosity of the human mind comes up a couple times. I think that's a really great quote the first time. The art is such a bigger theme than I anticipated, especially come the end, and the way that we try and reflect things in our mind into real life, and it always ends up happening in these weird abstract ways, because these things that are connected, like her identification with like the Twix and whatever else it said on it, was just like a random collection of things, but it makes sense in our minds and it's real. And just because it doesn't make sense in our reality, and it comes back to the conversation in the multiverse, the fact that it technically in some reality it's possible that it could rain jello, all just meshes, it all links together so well, it's so coherent. And the fact that we have so many of these weird strong symbols in here, like the egg and the whale, and there's more that I just can't think of right now. Thunderbutt and his symbol of being a werewolf. This book itself is one of those weird abstract works of art that show things that shouldn't be connected but are, and reflect the way we feel on the inside. So dang good. I loved it so much. I've had a lot of fun here talking to you about it. I think talking about these kinds of books are always so much fun. I hope I maybe convinced you that it's cleverer than you thought it was. If you've read it again, please let me know what you thought down below. I'd love to talk about it. That's everything. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a beautiful morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name's Jade. I hope I see you again next time. Bye! To understand why she found this so interesting. Why she wanted to hit... particular